think of when you hear the word diabetes? Obesity, death, needles. When I think of the word diabetes, I think of my younger sister Christy, right here, who is a type 1 diabetic, and I think of my grandfather Clarence, who is a type 2 diabetic. I think of the lifestyle changes, the modified diets, and the insulin injections. But there are ways to help yourself from having to go through this life. There are ways to help keep diabetes under control. Diabetes is not necessarily a preventable disease, but it is a controllable disease. And I'd love to tell you a few lifestyle changes that can help curb the chances of being diagnosed. Diabetes is a disease that most people have heard of, but not many people know the details of. The American Diabetes Association defines diabetes as a group of diseases characterized by high blood glucose levels that result from the defects in the body's ability to produce and/or use insulin. Essentially, diabetes results from the body's ability to break down all the sugars and starches that it takes in. This produces a high blood glucose level. The body's way of breaking down the sugars is through the amount of insulin that it produces. If it does not produce enough insulin, the sugar levels build up in the blood, and the lack of insulin production has to be supplemented through injections. The severity of the disease depends upon the amount of insulin that your body is producing. Type 1 is the more severe and requires routine injections. Type 2 requires supplemental treatment, including chewable tablets and a healthy diet. Type 1 diabetes was previously known as juvenile diabetes. In this type of diabetes, the body does not produce insulin. Insulin is a hormone that is needed to convert sugar, starches, and other food energy into the energy needed for daily life. It is necessary for the body to be able to use glucose for energy. When you eat food, the body breaks down all of the sugars and starches into glucose, the basic bodily fuel. When glucose builds up in the blood, instead of going into the cells, it can cause diabetes. Typically, type 1 diabetes is diagnosed in children and young adults, but insulin therapy is used to help people manage their condition and live semi-normal lives. The symptoms of type 1 diabetes include frequent urination, unusual thirst, extreme hunger, unusual weight loss, extreme fatigue, and irritability. Another type of diabetes is called type 2. It's the most frequent form of diabetes, especially now that obesity has become a problem throughout the United States. It has been determined that there are nearly 79 people in the world who are pre-diabetic. Most of these people will fall into the type 2 category. Type 2 diabetes is most prevalent in African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and the aged population. In this form of diabetes, the body either doesn't produce enough insulin or the cells ignore it. Typically, this form of diabetes is treated with a healthy diet and exercise, but if that does not keep the glucose levels under control, medication can also be prescribed. Type 2 diabetes is typically seen in the obese population, and the symptoms include those of type 1, along with frequent infections, blurred vision, cuts or bruises that are slow to heal, tingling or numbness in the extremities, and reoccurring skin, gum, and bladder infections. The last type of diabetes that I'd like to cover is called gestational diabetes. This type of diabetes does not necessarily mean that you have diabetes when you're no longer pregnant. It merely means that you have high blood sugar levels during pregnancy. Gestational diabetes typically begins around the 24th week of pregnancy, and it affects nearly 18% of all pregnancies. The cause of gestational diabetes is so far unknown. We just know that the hormones from the placenta that help the baby develop block the action of the mother's insulin in the body. This is known as insulin injection resistance. Insulin resistance makes it hard for the mother's body to use insulin when she's pregnant. The mother's body is not making enough insulin for the glucose levels, and then the glucose levels rise. The high sugar levels can cause macrosomia, or a fat baby, where there's too much insulin created by the baby and the extra energy is then stored as fat. Babies whose mothers have gestational diabetes are more likely to have breathing problems when they're born. Typically, the mother will have no symptoms aside from being tested while pregnant. However, the Diabetes Health Center states that they will be more likely to have gestational diabetes if they're overweight prior to pregnancy or have a previous history of gestational diabetes. Also, if they have a family history of diabetes, they're more likely to have gestational diabetes. All in all, diabetes is a disease that many people have heard of, but not many people know the symptoms of. If America can learn to protect themselves against obesity, it is more likely that 79 million people who have been diagnosed as pre-diabetic can keep themselves from becoming a type 1 or type 2 diabetic. In closing, Diabetes is a disease that is not necessarily preventable, but it is a nationwide threat. The unhealthier that our country gets, the higher the diabetes population will get as well. If you take anything from this presentation, please understand that while diabetes is not curable, a healthy lifestyle can help keep it under control. And in my slide, I will show that type 1 diabetes is mostly known because your body does not produce enough insulin, or possibly none at all. In type 2, your body does not produce enough insulin, or the cells ignore the amount that is produced. And then gestational diabetes, your body becomes resistant to the insulin, creating difficulties. Facts that you may not know is that 18.8 million people worldwide have been diagnosed with diabetes. 79 million people in the world have been diagnosed as pre-diabetic, and then 18% of pregnancies in gestational diabetes. Thanks and have a good day!
Good job. Okay, let's see.